Hello, I'm Phil Street, and I'm the Director of Planning of the Tug Hill Commission in Watertown. The Tug Hill Commission is a state agency that provides technical assistance to 41 towns and 18 villages on the eastern edge of Lake Ontario. And if you know anything about lake effect storms, you'll know that the Tug Hill region gets a lot of the worst snow in New York State, if not the eastern United States. So snow plowing is a huge issue for us. We have a paper that we wrote recently called Protecting Town Roads from Snow Plowing Demands, a checklist, which was provided to you by the Rockefeller Center in your packet, and thank you very much for putting that in the packet. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on that paper, why we wrote it, and what its contents are. In the Tug Hill region, in our 41 towns, we have a lot of unplowed roads. We know that there's about 158 miles of what we call minimum maintenance roads, which is one class of unplowed road. But there's also what are called seasonal use roads, and there's no central database of where these roads are, how many miles of them there are, but I'm guessing that there's probably another 100 miles or so of those roads. So I'm thinking we have several hundred miles of unplowed roads in the Tug Hill region. And to state the problem, oftentimes these roads have camps along them, seasonal camps. People will snowmobile to them, or they'll just be used in the summertime. And then all of a sudden some landowner, I can tell in Clinton County, they know about this. Some landowner there will decide they want to live year-round in a camp, and they will want their emergency services and their mail delivered to them, and they'll want school busing, and they'll want all the amenities of living in the city but living in the country. And they'll come to the town board and demand plowing. And another alternative to this scenario is that we have camp owners who live on roads which I consider of indeterminate jurisdiction. We don't really know whether they're town roads or not. They might have been abandoned, or they might be private roads, but whatever the status of the road is, the town doesn't think it's their jurisdiction, and so they will get into a fight with the landowner over whether they are responsible for plowing that road or not. You may ask, well, why do towns care about whether they plow a road or not? And I realize it's getting late and you folks are getting tired, so all my slides are pretty much reading free, okay? This gives you kind of an example of what we're dealing with. This is a typical town plow in Tug Hill. This is in the town of Martinsburg, actually in Lewis County. And that's the road that it's setting on is a typical unplowed road. And you can see that that's just not going to work. It's putting a square peg in a round hole there. In order for that road to become what we call a four-season road, there would have to be some substantial work on the profile of it. It would need some ditching and pavement and widening and a lot of brush removal, and there's a lot that would need to be done to the profile of that road, and there may even be some things that need to be done to the geometry of the road in order to make that plow be able to operate on it. But drainage is a huge issue for these types of roads because they become mud pits essentially in the springtime if you don't do a lot of work on them. This is an example of a kind of a unplowed road, and you might have culvert work that needs to be done, and a lot of vegetation removal. There's a lot of work that would have to be done to make that road plowable, and enormous expense. The problem is exacerbated by the fact that in New York State, most of these roads, these unplowed roads were created in the 19th century, and they're highways by prescription, it's called. In other words, the road was created by the public traversing the land for, in those days it was 20 years, and by traversing the path, it became a town road, and there became a public easement. That's been changed to 10 years now. So you traverse a piece of private property for 10 years and use it as a public road for 10 years, it becomes a public road. And that's how these roads were created. But you only have the right to the actual right-of-way that's actually being used. You don't have anything outside that. So in order to widen that road, property has to actually be purchased. And that can be extremely expensive. And in many cases, and this might be an example here, I don't know, in many cases, these roads are in very, very remote areas, and they often either border or cross state land. And so because of the alienation problem, it's impossible to expand those roads onto state land. So these towns are in real difficulties in trying to improve these roads. Our highway superintendents estimate that it would cost probably something in the neighborhood of $100,000 a mile to make one of these roads a four-season road. And that's on top of about $8,000 per mile per year in order to actually plow the road, the actual cost of plowing. When you figure that state budgets, or we have a state tax cap, and highway expenditures are something around 50–60% of town budgets, we're talking about a real hit on the taxpayers. The other problem we have too with turning these roads into year-round four-season roads is that a lot of them are used for recreational trails currently. You've got snowmobile trails, cross-country ski trails. They're integral parts of a larger trail system. You take one of these trails off the system and you can be disrupting enormous amounts of recreational activity and trail systems. The first attempt to do something about this was done back in the late 70s when the state passed a law. It's called the Seasonal Limited Use Highway Law. And you'll see these signs. These are the signs that are posted on a seasonal use road. But there's a lot of confusion about what a seasonal use road is. A seasonal use road essentially is a statement by the local highway superintendent that they're not going to plow that road until somebody makes them plow it. There's nothing about the seasonal use designation that protects a town from being forced to plow a road. It's merely a statement that we're not plowing it. So that law ended up being a bust. It didn't help our towns at all. The next effort to do something about this problem came in the mid-1980s when the state legislature created what was called the Local Roads Classification Task Force. And that morphed into another organization called the Local Roads Research and Coordination Council. In 1992, they came out with a recommendation. Well, they were tasked with a couple things. One was to create what were called low-volume road standards, because rural roads in New York at that point had no road standards for them. So one of the things they did was create low-volume road standards. The other thing was they invented the concept of the minimum maintenance road. Okay. Now, minimum maintenance roads is kind of the center of our efforts to try to protect these roads from being forced to be plowed. The task force came up with a process for establishing minimum maintenance roads, and the Commission on Rural Resources actually designed the model law, which our towns use today. Oops, when you create a minimum maintenance road, you post it with a diamond sign like this, and that diamond sign was added to the New York supplement of the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So that's a New York State unique sign. That one happens to be on a road that's being used recreationally. But this is a map of New York. It's maybe a little bit hard to see. It's a map of New York that shows all the towns that have adopted minimum maintenance road laws that we know of. And you can see in the big green clusters, Tug Hill. There's a lot of them there. But it does affect the southern tier quite a bit. And we have reason to believe if there's ever a state law authorizing this concept, there'd be a lot more of those green towns there. So what we did, this whole minimum maintenance road concept right now is done under what's called municipal home rule law. There's not anything in the highway law that authorizes it. So what we're trying to do with this checklist is kind of bulletproof our communities as much as we can using the minimum maintenance road concept to be able to carry this out without and defeat attempts to require plowing. We have in our checklist we have 3 planning activities and 4 regulatory activities. The first planning activity is to actually map your roads and figure out where they are. And surprisingly, most towns really don't know what they have jurisdiction over. And this is largely because there's been abandonments that have not been recorded. So we work with the towns and try to map their roads and record those abandonments. Abandonments occur by a road not being used for 6 years. And so you've got to somehow record that. If you can record it, then the public has 1 year to challenge that. But a lot of these abandonments that have occurred over the years through non-use have never been recorded. So it's difficult when that's what creates these property owner town board disputes. The second point we have is to adopt the model low volume road law that the Commission on Rural Resources prepared. The highway superintendent then can classify the roads as low volume roads into the 6 categories that it provides for. And then 2 of those categories could be further established as minimum maintenance roads through a second local law. The third item we have is to do something with your comprehensive plan for the community that recognizes the concept of not plowing roads. Articulate your plan for growth and development through supporting your regulatory program that's coming in the next few steps. Talk about the fiscal impacts and the open space and the habitat protection that you'd like to do by keeping roads unplowed. The fourth step is to adopt the minimum maintenance road law. This is kind of a complex adoption. It was established by the Local Roads Classification Task Force, and it requires notification of all the property owners. There can't be an existing dwelling or a business on the road and things like that. The fifth step is to use what we call camp zoning or seasonal use zoning. The minimum maintenance road law affects the actual roadbed, but you want to get at the property that's adjacent to the road as well. And through your zoning law, what you can do is classify uses as seasonal uses. And we are recommending the communities classify uses as, by their very nature, uses that do not require snow plowing. So that's actually written right into the zoning law. The problem is, and the reason this is not a solution in itself, is because there's a lot of nonconformities along these roads. There's a lot of things that are already there and grandfathered. So even though this can affect new uses, you've got a lot of older uses there that are going to be exempt from this provision. The sixth thing we have is to develop a highway access law, and that's the interface between the minimum maintenance road and the zoned land along it. And the reason we kind of came to the conclusion that this was necessary is and it deals with a corner lot phenomenon where you've got a use that has access to both a minimum maintenance road and to a regular road. You don't want to prevent that use from going there if it accesses the regular, fully plowed road. But what we're trying to do is tie a curb cut permit to the zoning law, that you need proper zoning before you can get a curb cut permit. And then the final thing that we're recommending is that you look carefully at subdivision controls and make sure that roads that are being put into new subdivisions, which have the potential at any point to become public roads, are built and designed in a way that can be plowed. Okay? The weakness in this whole system, as I said, is that this is all being done under municipal home rule law. We would like to see a state statute that actually authorizes minimum maintenance roads through the highway law. There is bills right now before the Senate and the Assembly. I'll give you those numbers for anybody that wants them. Anybody that wants to look this up, we got A 3724 in the Assembly and S 2910 in the Senate. And that's bills right in the committee right now. And our towns would love it if those bills could get passed. That's all I have.